the human voice is one of the most powerful forces in the world. It can inspire revolutions, ignite hope, or even bring peace. But what about the voices we aren't accustomed to hearing? So throughout my life, I have encountered many different kinds of voices that I wasn't accustomed to hear. I've worked with children with severe disabilities, interpreting needs beyond words. I've taught English to kids in the New Delhi slums, helping them find a voice that could travel across cultures. And I've spoken for the creatures of the ocean at an aquarium, helping them, advocating for their lives that depends on our choices. But today, I stand in front of you because I have probably encountered the most extraordinary, inaudible creatures on Earth, the microorganisms. So what comes to mind when I say microorganisms? Germs? Disease? Something to be eradicated or avoided? For most, the idea of microbes conjures fear, and their first instinct would be to scrub them away or sanitize. But we shouldn't. In fact, we should do the opposite. We should make them thrive. That's what I'll tell you today, why you should perceive microorganisms as your greatest allies rather than your enemy. Because as a microbiologist, I've sought to understand them, and I'm convinced that if you know what I know by now, you would cheer for them just as much as I do. So I think that we tend to fear what we don't know. So let me start out by clarifying what microorganisms are. Because they're not tiny insects or worms, but most often single-celled organisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, microalgae. They are defined by their microscopic size, invisible to the naked eye. But under a microscope, they reveal a breathtaking diversity. Spirals, sticks, spheres in every imaginable color. But they aren't just diverse, they are everywhere, and they are abundant. If you take a teaspoon from your kitchen and you walk out in your garden and you dig up some soil, you would hold 42 billion microorganisms in that teaspoon. Quick estimate, that is 6 times the number of people on Earth in a teaspoon. Luckily, the vast majority of microorganisms on Earth play vital roles in sustaining life. Not just theirs, but ours too. So let me share with you 3 examples of why we need microorganisms and the vital roles they play. Let's start by take 2 deep breaths, if you want. Because you see, one of those breaths was made possible solely by microorganisms. Because microorganisms floating around in the ocean, known as microalgae, they are responsible for producing half of the oxygen on Earth. They are literally fueling our existence. And they've been doing so for billions of years. They created our very atmosphere in this way 3.5 billion years ago. If that is not convincing you of how vital microbes are, let's go to example number 2. Because microorganisms are masters of resilience. They thrive in the most extreme environments. Hot springs, icy tundras, crushing depths of the ocean. Places we consider uninhabitable. And apparently, they also exist in places marked by human devastation. So picture Chernobyl, a radioactive wasteland, a place where humans cannot persist, at least not for that long. But nature is quietly defying the odds. Plants and animals are slowly returning, also microorganisms. But they are not just surviving, don't you worry. Because researchers have found that microorganisms, a fungi, a mold, is capable of absorbing the radioactive rays, like they are eating or consuming the radioactive waste. So you see, these tiny life forms, they succeed where even our most advanced technologies fail. I say that it's now up to us to find a way to use this superpower to work together with the microorganisms to fix the mess. But before catastrophe strikes, like Chernobyl, microorganisms are on duty, working to protect the planet. So that brings me to the final example. Maybe you heard about the devastating oxygen depletion in the ocean, driven by the excessive use of nitrogen fertilizers in agriculture. You see, what happens is when nitrogen seeps into the ocean, it triggers a bloom of microscopic life. At some point, this microscopic life dies and will be degraded. That process consumes oxygen. That is completely natural. At first, the system copes, but if the nitrogen overload becomes too great, oxygen level plummet. This will cause the seabed to release toxic sulfates. This toxic release devastates everything in its path. It will kill all life. A catastrophe. But before it unfolds, something amazing happens. A white microbial sheet spreads across the seabed, a living shield of bacteria working to stabilize the environment. Because these bacteria, they can use the toxic sulfates as their energy source, and thereby preventing it from floating out and killing all life. You see, once again, microorganisms are the last line of defense when ecosystems are pushed to their breaking point by human activities. But sometimes the burden we place on them is simply too great. And then we have to remember, if the microorganisms fail, the consequences are devastating. Not just for them, but for us as well. So what can we do to make microorganisms succeed instead of fail? Well, it's obvious that we first of all should stop pushing the microorganisms to the limit. And then we could maybe start to try to understand them, maybe even listen to them. Yes, we can listen to microorganisms. And I know I started out by saying that they are inaudible creatures. But that doesn't mean they aren't communicating, because they are constantly. We just can't hear them in the way we hear each other. You know that earthy smell after a rainfall if you're walking in the forest? Some find it very pleasant. That's microorganisms communicating. Because microorganisms, they use chemistry, tiny molecules, to talk with each other. The earthy odor, that is caused by a molecule called geosmin, and we can smell it. In fact, humans are 200,000 times more sensitive to geosmin than a shark is to the scent of blood in water. 200,000 times? Talk about superpower. But what are they saying? Well, this is what microbiologists like me are working on, because we believe that by unlocking the communication is the missing link enabling us to work better together with microorganisms to turn things around. Microorganisms may not have voices we can hear, but their impact resounds louder than any human words. Yet we are pushing them to the edge, depleting our soils, polluting the ocean, eradicating them from our bodies and Earth, and creating conditions where even their most extraordinary resilience falters. The irony is so clear. While we think of them as small and insignificant, their role in our survival is monumental. Imagine if we truly embrace this truth. So what about we stopped interfering? How about we stopped treating nature as something to conquer and instead gave microorganisms the space and conditions they need in order to thrive? Because they don't ask for recognition, only that we let them do what they've been doing for billions of years. Create balance and sustain life. So let's shift our perspective here. Let's care for the unseen, work with the unheard, and protect the indispensable. By listening to these inaudible creatures and acting on their behalf, we're not only ensuring our survival, we're also ensuring theirs.